Welcome to many liters of wasted resin and many hours of failed prints. I'm gonna help you fix that. In this video, I'm gonna go over the settings I use in Lychee to support my 3D printed models. This seems to be a question that comes up quite often, and I think it's time that we addressed it. How about we just jump into it? If you want to support the videos, make sure to click like and subscribe. The one thing that I like about Lychee is the fact that if something goes wrong during the slicing, or if your computer hangs up or anything, it will give you this recovery mode, which is probably the best feature that I've found in any of the slicing softwares that I've used so far. 9 times out of 10, this will have recovered my model supports and most of the work that I had put in previously. I don't even have enough hands or feet to count the amount of times that Cheetahbox has crashed on me and lost hours of support time. And luckily for us, I selected some wonderful models for us to support. As 3D printing and Warhammer is a huge hot topic right now, I'm going to use this time to show you how I support the models that I find for free or paid on Google. I will not be linking any of the modelers or the models or files at all for these files because Games Workshop loves to strike them and take them down, and I would like other people to enjoy these files and also to be able to afford Warhammer models. I have no clue about Warhammer, I don't understand a single thing about it. I've recently been watching a lot of YouTube videos on the lore of Warhammer 40k, and from what I know, this is a Blades Guardsman, I think. So what we're going to do is we're going to support him. I'm going to show you how I support him. I'm going to show you my support settings, and then I'm going to print him, and I'm going to show you the quality that I can achieve with my printers. First things first, when I'm supporting a model like this, I'm going to look for the correct orientation of these parts. So let's start off with the head. The most important thing with this head specifically is that he's going to have a main piece at the bottom that needs supporting, and perhaps a piece on his chin, or if we tilt him backwards, he might have these two pieces here that need to be supported. But that's okay. We're going to give him a little tilt, just so that mostly his face is what's visible, and I'd rather support these two little pieces at the back, perhaps one underneath his chin here. So having a look at the orientation of that head, you can see that the main supports are going to need to be at the bottom of the head, obviously to anchor it down, and just underneath the chin. Let's move on to these shoulder pads, for example. You never really want anything to be perfectly straight up like that, because if it's perfectly straight up, you're either going to have a big footprint to support at the bottom, or you're also going to have horrible lines through your print, just because the orientation does affect how your print quality turns out. I'm going to put these at this angle, I think that will do, and then the sword, I want the sword just facing pretty much upright. As in this arm, this piece that's going to be anchoring it is going to be underneath the shoulder pad, so it's not a problem to put supports or major supports on this part anyway. I do find that smaller little pieces like these little sharp edges are better to support because the supports don't leave as much of a damage to it. Looking at this arm, however, I don't like the fact that this skull is going to be stuck on the side. It's not going to be printed as well, so we'll tilt this a little bit more this way, which means we're probably going to have to support some of these fingers, but it's not the end of the world. I'd rather have the skull as defined as possible. With the shield, we want it to be mostly upright, but not all the way upright. Most of the supports will be here underneath. You won't really see them as much. You're not going to see the skull as much, perhaps just a little bit. The one thing to remember with 3D printing in resin is that the top part of the model is going to be pretty much the most detailed. So it's like almost this 30-degree area of the top part of the model is going to be the most detailed. So if you look underneath and you have a lot of details underneath, you maybe want to try and reorient your part so that you're not supporting a lot of detail at the bottom, which is going to get mushed up by the supports and by the fact that there is weight on the ends of those supports, and it's just not going to print as well. A lot of times you want a body to be quite far angled back. The biggest problem that you have is that with these guys, there's a lot of detail on their backpacks and things. So we want to try and preserve as much detail all around as possible. Remembering that if we keep the model too vertical, we're going to have lines from the 3D printer. We want to try and keep it within that 20 to 30 sort of degrees angle as much as possible, but obviously keeping in mind that we need to support these parts as well. I'm not happy with how these guys are. Let's move on to the preparation, and the most important thing is to lift them off the build plate. We need space for the supports to fit underneath, so we're going to go to utilities and we're going to lift it 5mm off the build plate. We're going to go into the island function, the magic island function, and we're going to click search. This function will search for all the islands that are available to the slicer. This is not going to be all the islands. Sometimes you will have to get a couple of the islands yourself. So be mindful of that. Just a quick brief check that everything is looking like it should look. For my support settings, I'm going to put them on the screen now so you can see all the different settings that I use, and you can make a choice on how you want to use yours later on as well. Starting off with light settings. These are the medium settings. And these are my heavy settings. Let's get into supporting this model. Start with the head, which is one of the easiest things to support. We're going to drop a medium in at the bottom. And with something like this, I like to put in a sort of foundation for everything to hold on to. So this is what's going to hold the model down. So I use 5 supports in that kind of configuration at the bottom. This will leave damage, but it doesn't matter that it's going to leave damage under here because that will be glued into the neck. And as this whole head is going to be resting on this, and I can probably sand underneath here if I need to, I'm going to put 2 supports here. Be careful not to have it overhang because it will pull a chip out the corner of your model. Notice how that is an island, 100%. That is an island as well, and so is that, right? So the software is not perfect in selecting islands every time, but that's why we have a human to figure this out later. So I'm going to add a support here. It's going to be a light support because it doesn't need anything major on the back here. It's a tiny part, this. And we'll add a couple supports there and just make sure that that's supported as well as this side. Perfect. Let's move on to the shoulder pad. So same thing here. We need to anchor the part down, and anchoring that part is going to be done in my case with medium supports. Since you're not going to notice any of this detail or any of this damage, I'll put them here as well. And then we'll just make sure we got mediums here. And since this will be held down by medium supports here, I can use light supports over here so that the damage is a little bit less, but it still supports the part that's printing in thin air. And then I will place a couple through the center just to make sure. It's totally overkill, but it's a lot better to get a part to come out than have a part fail and waste a load of resin in the vat. Alright, so we move on to the shield. Again, starting at the bottom, we want to make sure that there's mediums on the bottom. I'm just going to move this to make sure that it's spot on. Put one there. And for this shield, I'm going to make sure it's solidly anchored. Again, it's totally overkill. You're going to find a lot of people are going to say that you don't need to use this many, but I don't have many fails. And at the end of the day, I don't want to waste a load of resin, and it's just a waste of time supporting objects to find that all I needed to do was add 3 more supports and it would have not failed. So I'm just not going to waste my time with that. See again here, the app doesn't pick up these 2 islands that are here. So I'm going to support them myself. I'll probably use a medium on that just because it is a slightly larger object. We'll use a medium on this corner too. And then I want to put a light just over there. Again, there's another support it didn't catch. That can be a medium. I tell you what, we'll add a tiny little one over there just to be sure about it. That can be a medium. Another medium. And I'll add 2 more mediums here. Perfect. And then we'll add one here for support and another one just in case. And then these little dots, since I can pull these supports off and you will not notice that at all, I can use more mediums there to make sure that the part's 100% anchored by that part. I'll put a light there. Sweet, let's move on to the sword arm. Again, always start with the medium. You never want to start with the light because the lights just don't handle. The main thing that I'm looking for when I do my supports is how I can anchor that part down without seeing the damage when the part is printed. So again, like I said, a lot of these pieces, for example, these little areas here, I can sand off a lot of these sections. You know, they're quite small parts, but I can get in there to sand them. So I'd rather have the part not fail than have a failed part and wasted resin, because to me, I don't want to waste resin. Resin is expensive and it's not worth all the cleanup. Just to make sure that that is completely anchored down, I'll use a couple of supports over here. Way too many supports, but who wants a failed print? No one wants a failed print. Just make sure you put the supports in an area you can't see them and support the living crap out of it. As long as it comes out the printer and it's not failed, you've done a good job, son. Okay, let's move on to old Duty Pal over here. So we'll support his butthole. That's more of an anchor than anything else. We've got to support this little piece. When it comes to their little dress skirt thingies, I like to support the whole edge with lights. I will support with a medium to start off with, and then I'll just smash a whole load of lights, because it's not hard at all to sand the straight flat piece on the model. But it is hard to clean out my resin vat when there's a wasted print in it. And it's also hard for me to buy more resin when I could have just supported more and done 5 seconds of sanding. Let's make those lights, just so we don't ruin that little detail. Perfect. We go with the medium here. Turn back to the lights again. Support the entire dress. On their feet, what I normally do is I go crazy with supports, especially because it's not a huge model, but it's bigger parts, so it's easier to just, as I keep saying throughout the video, for me, I'd rather have more supports on the model and sand off a foot or two than to have a model fail and have to do the print all over again. This is how I do my supporting. You don't have to do it this way. If you know better or think you know better, I don't really care, because this works for me and I have some great prints, so I'm not going to change what I do now and then end up with more failures later on because I'm trying to figure out a different way, when at the end of the day, this is just the easiest way of doing it, really. So you'll notice that I keep scrolling over parts. I'm just making sure that none of them are random surprise islands, because that tends to happen. So I just scroll over here. You can see there is a random island there, so it's best to just whack a support on it, especially on the inside here. You're never gonna see the inside of this dude's dress, and if you do, I don't know what to say about you. So with things like these, we want to make sure that it's not going to come off. And again, like I say, I can just stick a file in here and file off that if it makes any damage. But I just make sure that those little side pouch thingies are held on nice and solid. And I know from printing this model already that those two are definitely not islands there. So I'm not going to worry about them at the moment. We'll remove them later. So the model itself is looking pretty well anchored down now. What we're going to do is we're going to start moving on to the back of the model, which is arguably the more difficult part of supporting these things. So once the parts are supported, the last thing that I need to do is change to a raft, and the raft that I use for all my supports is pixelated, and I use a 0.30mm raft. I usually just move the parts around to make them a bit neater on the build plate, and that's about it. For my Sonic Mini 4K, I don't use any anti-aliasing. Hopefully you enjoyed that just as much as me and Pete did. And if you did, make sure to hit that like button if you would like to see more videos like this in the future. Also, if you don't want to miss out, consider subscribing. And if you really want to help support the channel, there is a Patreon that you can subscribe to as well. Thank you for watching. And if you didn't like that video, everybody here knows what to do. Even Pete knows what you need to do. Just f*** off, man. And that's how you do a recording.